Well, the DNA test came back and shows that line actually started in Mexico, the Guadalajara area.
I know something that maybe even my ancestor didn't know.
History has a way of making its way back into the present in very uncanny ways, and this time it revealed something that many thought wasn't possible. Particularly for a certain demographic, it was a shocker. Hidden in every Mexican's gene was a mystery that defied every scientific explanation. This genetic anomaly was something even the best scientists couldn't fully explain. In this video, we'll be revealing the truth, and it might change everything you know about human survival. The genetic mirage of homogeneity. Mexicans and people with Mexican roots have had to be boxed under the Hispanic or Latino label, and for years, that's how it's always been. For as long as anyone can remember, everyone just assumed Latinos, Mexicans, and Hispanics had the same biological blueprint. But it soon turned out to be completely wrong when a landmark study blew the entire concept wide open. Scientists from Stanford University, UC San Francisco, and Mexico's National Institute of Genomic Medicine teamed up for a massive genetic expose. They gathered DNA from over 1,000 individuals across Mexico and analyzed more than 1 million genetic checkpoints called single nucleotide polymorphisms. What they uncovered shocked the scientific community. Instead of finding a uniform group of people, the team revealed a dazzling, unexpected mosaic of genotypes that proved their DNA makeup was incredibly diverse. Now, not only did it prove to be shocking, it was medically incompetent because millions of people were being treated as a single, identical group. This was dangerous because there are medications that work for a particular region and might be ineffective or dangerous for someone from another. To put this into perspective, the data showed that the genetic differences between distinct indigenous groups within Mexico are as vast and pronounced as the biological divide between a native European and a native East Asian. We are talking about massive continental-scale differences existing inside the borders of a single nation. For 500 years, conventional history taught us that centuries of colonial mixing, migration, and marriages had in some way just mixed everyone up into one genetic makeup. But this recent study proved that theory wrong. The ancient, distinct ancestral signals were never erased. In fact, they are still clearly visible in the bloodlines of modern Mexicans today. But to understand how an entire continent's worth of biological diversity became concentrated inside a single nation, we have to take a step back down memory lane to where it all began. 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, the Earth was a frozen and unforgiving place. It was there and then that a small, adventurous group of humans made a decision that changed history. They walked out of Siberia and crossed Beringia, which was a massive temporary land bridge that connected Asia to modern-day Alaska. These brave nomads were the exclusive founders of a whole new world. Now, because only a tiny group made this original journey, they didn't bring the full spectrum of global human genetics with them. Instead, they carried a highly restricted subset of genes, which scientists call a founding bottleneck. In simpler terms, it meant that because there were only a few people, there were only a few genetic diverse features that made their way to the new populations. And as the population increased, most of the traits from the original nomads were lost. That is exactly what happened to the genetic pool of the entire American continent at its very start. As these small families pushed further south over generations and eventually made their way to Mexico, they soon began to procreate. Soon, these groups of people also had to migrate and travel, and some eventually had to split up. Some families headed toward the coastlines, others climbed into deep valleys, and some stayed in the rugged mountain ranges. Once these groups separated, they became completely cut off from their northern ancestors and from each other. This total isolation triggered a genetic drift where the traits in these populations changed over the course of time, which was caused by the initial scattering of the tiny group of nomads. Thousands of years before the first permanent cities were built, or the great famous empires rose, these localized genetic variations were already maturing in complete secrecy. The blueprint for Mexico's staggering diversity was being silently written in real time. As these nomadic peoples stopped migrating and finally settled across Mexico's rugged terrain, they split across an invisible, permanent line that would alter their biology forever. Aridoamerica versus Mesoamerica. Ancient Mexico was divided into two completely different parts, which were Aridoamerica in the north and Mesoamerica in the south. It was a massive ecological border that dictated exactly how people lived and evolved. In the north, Aridoamerica was a harsh, punishing desert. It consisted of groups such as the Raramuri and the Seri that lived as highly mobile hunter-gatherers who were constantly on the move to survive extreme heat waves and severe water shortages. These people had to be tough, fast, and light on their feet. Down south in Mesoamerica, the story was completely different. The land on that side was blessed with predictable rainfall and incredibly fertile soil. This abundance allowed communities to stop moving and build massive, permanent agricultural empires. It was from this part of Mexico that famous civilizations like the Maya, the Zapotecs, and the Mixtecs thrived, creating huge cities supported by massive cornfields. This environmental wall created a sharp, diagonal axis running from the northwest to the southeast, and it was also a strict biological barrier, preventing people from crossing over and ever mixing. Because they stayed on their own sides of the wall, their bodies underwent a deep metabolic specialization. The desert populations naturally selected traits that were perfect for fat retention and water conservation, helping them survive long periods without food, while the southern populations adapted to a heavy grain diet and developed immunities to tropical parasites hiding in the jungles. Back to the recent studies on Mexican DNA, it was not really a surprise that the data matched with phenotypes of ancient Mexican people. However, the biggest genetic divide in modern Mexico runs exactly along that prehistoric bioclimatic border. The choices made by those ancient farmers and desert hunters are still printed directly into the genome of their descendants. But nature wasn't finished with isolating these populations. Within these broad ecological zones, the persistent Mexican landscape was about to create micro-containment zones. One could say the physical landscape of ancient Mexico contributed to restricting the people into one place. The entire country is dominated by massive mountain fortresses, specifically the Sierra Madre Occidental and the Sierra Madre Oriental. Down south, these rocky peaks give way to thick, impenetrable tropical rainforests. Crossing them was incredibly dangerous, meaning that individual communities stayed stuck in their own territories. Families lived completely isolated from neighbors who were settled only a few valleys away, remaining apart for thousands of years. This extreme physical separation created a heavy linguistic insulation, as Mexico recognizes 68 distinct indigenous ethnic groups today. Remarkably, these groups speak languages that belong to 11 completely separate linguistic families. To put this into perspective, some of these neighboring tribes speak languages that share fewer common roots than English shares with Russian. Because these groups never intermarried, unique genetic mutations became highly concentrated within specific tribes. In populations like the Lacandan Maya or the Triqui, certain genetic traits became locked into the gene pool over generations. Scientists call this the fixation of alleles. Without new people entering the group, the genetic distance between these tribes grew to extreme levels. This created a highly specific micro-regional signature across the country. The genetic blueprint of a native person from the northern desert state of Sonora is fundamentally distinct from a native person living in the southern Yucatan Peninsula. Even their genetic makeup isn't the same. For millennia, this complex, hyper-localized genetic mosaic remained pristine and entirely undisturbed until the arrival of an unprecedented colonial cataclysm in 1519. The 16th century genetic bottleneck. When the Spanish conquistadors landed on the shores of Mexico, they brought horses, armor, and weapons. However, their deadliest cargo was completely invisible to the naked eye. The Europeans unknowingly carried a devastating silent arsenal of old-world pathogens, which included smallpox, measles, and a mysterious, highly destructive pestilence known locally as coca-lizli. Because the indigenous populations had been biologically isolated from the rest of the world for thousands of years, they had zero prior immunity to handle these foreign illnesses. This pathogen invasion triggered one of the most severe demographic collapses ever in human history. Historians estimate that between 80% and 95% of the indigenous population were wiped out within a single century of European contact. This massive, rapid die-off fundamentally reshaped the entire human landscape of the region. From a genetic standpoint, this tragic loss of life also served as a sudden, severe bottleneck. In an incredibly short window of time, an unimaginable amount of the ancient pre-Columbian genetic diversity was permanently wiped off the map. Whole lineages, unique traits, and localized variations vanished completely. The people who managed to survive this biological onslaught didn't do so by random luck, but majorly because of survival selection. The individuals who lived through the plagues carried specific, highly robust immune system variants known as human leukocyte antigens, or HLA genes. These specific genes gave their defensive systems the precise tools needed to recognize, fight, and defeat the new viral threats. This brutal historical filter permanently changed the base allele frequencies across the entire territory. It formatted the genetic canvas for the modern era by establishing an entirely new biological baseline for the population. From the ashes of this catastrophic demographic collapse, a deliberate and widespread biological mixing began, one that would attempt to forge an entirely new human blueprint. This historic process, known as mestizaje, was the grand cultural and biological blending of European, indigenous, and later African populations. For centuries, this concept was celebrated as the creation of a single, unified national identity. However, modern genetic sequencing has uncovered a hidden, highly asymmetric reality written inside the average Mexican genome today. When scientists looked at the modern DNA blueprint, they found a stark, gender-biased secret that exposes the raw history of the Spanish conquest. By analyzing the Y chromosome, which passes down strictly from father to offspring, researchers discovered that paternal lineages are overwhelmingly European, mostly tracing back to the Iberian Peninsula. On the flip side, when they looked at mitochondrial DNA, which passes down exclusively from mothers, they found that maternal lineages remain over 80 to 90% indigenous American. It is a striking biological receipt of a colonial society dominated by European men and indigenous women. Yet, the genetic profile is far more complex than a simple story of two groups. Geneticists also exposed a forgotten third root in the Mexican family tree. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, Spanish ships brought an estimated 200,000 to 250,000 enslaved Africans into Mexico. This historical movement left a profound genetic imprint that is still highly concentrated in specific coastal regions today, particularly in Veracruz, along the Gulf Coast, and Costa Chica in the state of Guerrero. To complete this global puzzle, researchers also found a subtle layer of Asian genetic markers along the western coast. This unexpected input came from the historic Manila galleon trade routes, which sailed across the Pacific Ocean for 250 years, landing in ports like Acapulco. For hundreds of years, conventional history taught that this massive global blending completely erased the ancient lines. But when modern geneticists looked closer, they found that the past hadn't vanished at all. Instead, The indigenous portions of DNA inside a modern, mixed-race individual work exactly like a high-resolution GPS. Scientists are calling this a genomic GPS, and it is exposing historical secrets that have been hidden in plain sight for centuries. You might think that 500 years of internal migrations, massive urbanization, and families continuously blending would have completely scrambled the biological code. It seems logical that the historical picture would be totally blurred by now, yet the data shows these delicate geographic signals remain perfectly intact and completely unswamped by time. The ancient world refused to be washed away by modern life. If a modern individual possesses 45% Native American ancestry, scientists can now zoom into those specific genomic tracks. They can isolate those ancestral segments and pinpoint the exact sub-regional valley or specific tribe those ancestors belong to. Because of this precision, the fine-scale genetic structure of legendary ancient civilizations, including the Aztecs, Zapotecs, Mixtecs, and Maya, is well preserved. This deep-rooted biological architecture is still showing up within the modern populations inhabiting those exact geographic states today. The genetic map of modern Mexico perfectly respects and mirrors the territorial boundaries drawn by indigenous empires thousands of years ago. The ancient borders never truly fell because they simply relocated into the bloodlines of the descendants. This discovery is far more than an extraordinary historical novelty. It has direct, real-world implications for life, death, and human health today. The medical enigma. The most shocking place this biological reality plays out is inside modern respiratory clinics. For decades, doctors around the world have relied on standardized computer equations to measure how well a patient can breathe. These calculators estimate a person's normal lung capacity based on basic factors such as age, height, and one massive, generalized category labeled Latino or Hispanic. It is a one-size-fits-all clinical model that completely ignores the deep biological reality of regional history. This standard approach is causing a quiet crisis of systemic misdiagnoses. Because these algorithms ignore unique micro-regional genetic realities, they fail patients daily. Scientists discovered a groundbreaking pattern known as the 10% ancestry rule. Their data shows that a mere 10% shift in a patient's subcontinental Native American ancestry directly changes their natural lung volume. Consequently, an individual from one Mexican state might be falsely diagnosed with a severe lung disease they do not actually have, while a person from a different region has a life-threatening illness that goes completely undetected by the machine. Advanced genetic mapping has finally unmasked the hidden biological switches behind this breathing gap. Researchers identified entirely new ancestry-specific variants in specific genes called AGMO and SLIT3. These specific genetic traits directly control physical lung traits and dictate how severely asthma hits Mexican youth. Finding these hidden markers has sent shockwaves through global health organizations. It forces a radical realization that broad ethnic labels are not advanced science. They are dangerously imprecise shortcuts that threaten modern precision medicine. Doctors cannot treat a patient effectively if they are reading a flawed guide. But the secrets hidden inside this unique DNA stretch far beyond the lungs, reaching deep into the metabolic pathway that dictates how the body processes energy. Modern Mexico is currently facing a major public health crisis, with some of the highest global rates of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. For years, health officials pointed fingers entirely at modern lifestyle changes, blaming the rapid shift toward processed foods and sugary drinks. While diet certainly plays a part, genomic screening recently exposed a hidden, ancient culprit. Scientists uncovered a major genetic risk factor located in a gene called SLC16A11. When researchers tracked this specific variant backward through time, the results were shocking. This genetic trait was inherited directly through prehistoric interbreeding with Neanderthals. Today, it is found at exceptionally high frequencies in people with Native American ancestry, while remaining virtually non-existent in populations of European or African descent. This ancient inheritance completely alters lipid metabolism, which is the chemical process the body uses to handle fat. Thousands of years ago, this exact trait functioned as an incredible survival asset for nomadic hunter-gatherers. It allowed their bodies to store fat efficiently, helping them stay alive during intense, prolonged periods of famine and food scarcity. Today, this ancient survival mechanism creates a severe evolutionary mismatch. The mystery opens up even more questions that geneticists cannot quite answer. More researchers remain puzzled by the presence of other variants in genes, such as PP, ARG, and CYP2F2P. These specific markers appear to operate as complex, double-edged swords that offer unique protective advantages against certain diseases while simultaneously increasing a person's vulnerability to others. Despite uncovering these vital evolutionary clues, modern science faces a stumbling block that prevents it from fully mapping out this genetic frontier: the genomic gaps in indigenous science. The truth is that global genetics has a massive Eurocentric bias. Historically, over 80% of genome-wide association studies have been conducted exclusively on individuals of European descent, leaving the rest of the world in a giant scientific blind spot. In Mexico, out of 68 officially recognized ethnic groups, only a small fraction have had their genomes mapped at a high-resolution level. Gathering this information presents deep ethical challenges because many isolated communities hold a justified historical distrust toward Western medical institutions due to past exploitative research practices. This data gap comes with a heavy price tag. Without diverse genomic reference panels, medical science keeps making costly diagnostic errors, leaving non-European populations with less effective therapeutic options. To fight this disparity, Mexican institutions and homegrown scientists are leading their own local resistance, building fine-scale reference panels and completely bypassing global scientific neglect. As these local researchers chip away at the unknown, they are discovering that the answers locked within Mexican DNA do far more than tell the story of one country. They rewrite the entire history of human evolution. The profound lesson of Mexican genomics is the ultimate scientific dismantling of classic, rigid racial categories. The intense selective pressures of Mexico's diverse ecosystems have forged an extraordinary evolutionary toolkit of immune and metabolic adaptations within its people. By learning to decode these precise regional variations, scientists are building the foundational framework for the future of personalized medicine worldwide. At the end of it all, the unexplained anomalies within Mexican DNA reveal that genes are not fixed, permanent blueprints. They are fluid, historical narratives of adaptation and survival. As science racingly uncovers its secrets, it rewrites everything we thought we knew about medicine, history, and our shared human journey. What country's genetic history should we map out next? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on our channel so you never miss any of our uploads. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen to watch more videos like this one.